In the name of the one holy and living God. Let love be genuine. Hate what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with mutual affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not lag in zeal. Be ardent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in suffering. Persevere in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints. Extend hospitality to strangers. Last week, I took a swipe at folks who call themselves spiritual but not religious. I was chastised for that, and I've been repenting ever since. My father had 3 ambitions in life as far as I could tell. He wanted to have a big family, have a successful business, and sail. He accomplished all 3. He had 5 children. He owned the Dingley Press, which printed the L.L. Bean catalog, and he sailed and sailed and sailed. My mother, who was also a sailor, but unlike my father, a staunch and in her own way ambitious Episcopalian, said to me once, "Your father has no spiritual life." "Oh God, Mom," I shot back, "look at him when he's sailing." He was, without fail, transported. We 5 children grew up with 10 acres of woods behind our house in Cumberland. My brothers and I and a number of neighborhood kids spent most of our free time there when we were young. We climbed trees, we explored, we raced around on old fire trails, and so on and on and on. But there were no girls in the neighborhood, and by the time I was 6 or so, the gang of boys shunned me. So I took solitary walks or read books. But then a couple of years later, something else happened. I began to get up very early in the morning at 4 or 5. First, I would make coffee for my parents, and then I'd go out and walk in the cool or cold woods for an hour. I have no idea why I formed this habit, but I loved the woods, and I felt very much myself in contented solitude and a bit mystical. I was, at that point, I would say, spiritual but not religious. I said my prayers every night, but they were kind of rote. One of my grandmothers was very interested in wildflowers, and we would sometimes walk in the woods trying to identify different species. This was the only activity we ever did together, the only thing we held in common. One year, my teacher gave us a challenge. Who could bring in the longest list of wildflowers they'd identified? I won by a yard. This is the Sunday we begin the season of creation care, as you will see from our prayers. I'm not a learned environmentalist like Christian or Sam or Sarah Brake or others in the congregation, but I have come to understand that my spirituality, some portion of it, is all absorbed in the natural world. Like my father, when I sit on my family's beach in Falmouth or on our dock in Georgetown, sunning and swimming, I move out of my head and into my senses. One day, when I was swimming off that family beach, I turned to head back to shore and saw a seal about 20 feet from me. We looked at each other, and then we swam in towards shore together, eyes locked, until it got too shallow for him or her. I was, and I am, as my father was on his boats, transported. So I guess I'm spiritual and religious now. I had a colleague for many years in Massachusetts who was a passionate environmentalist. I said once that that was her justice issue. She replied, "It's everybody's issue." I knew she was right. Our planet is everybody's issue. A couple of weeks ago, we heard a word from God in Isaiah's prophecy. "Lift up your eyes to the heavens and look at the earth beneath. For the heavens will vanish like smoke, the earth will wear out like a garment, and those who live on it will die like gnats. That vision seems eerily and frighteningly prophetic today. The dangers to this fragile earth, our island home, seem too overwhelming even to contemplate. The temptation is to give up, to despair, or to use our energy railing against those who don't believe that climate change is a thing. How can they be so blind or so craven, we wonder? But we also wonder what we can possibly do. Climate change is so big, and we are so small. How do we put all this in the context of the Christian faith? First, I believe we have to confess to two sins. One is despair. Despair is the worst of sins. It's the opposite of hope. To despair is to ignore God's mercy, to deny God's grace. And to despair is to abandon any sense of responsibility for ourselves, for one another, and for the preciousness of God's creation. The other sin, I think, is pride. As prideful Christians, we have for too long believed that we are the lords of nature. Well, the tide has turned, so to speak, and we see on the nightly news scenes and stories of how nature is showing us otherwise. Fires, floods, droughts, devastation. And as prideful Christians, we have failed to investigate what other spiritualities have to teach us about how to understand the natural world and live in harmony with her. I've been reading a book called The Gatherings in preparation for an online book group discussion in a couple of weeks. It contains thoughts from Native and white Americans in Maine and New Brunswick who participated in a years-long project of gathering together and listening to one another. A Native woman says, "When the Europeans came, they told the world that we come here to Earth to suffer and then we die and go to a better place. Our elders say this is